On the quiet morning of June 16, 2020, the serene stillness of the Whitmore mansion was shattered by a scream that echoed through its grand halls. Melanie Whitmore, a celebrated art dealer and socialite, lay lifeless on the marble floor of her foyer, her body twisted in an eerie pose. The pale morning light spilled through the towering windows, casting shadows over the dark halo of blood surrounding her. Her eyes, wide open, seemed frozen in a perpetual gaze of horror, as though she had foreseen the violent end that awaited her. The multiple stab wounds to her chest, precise and deliberate, suggested a level of cold calculation. The scene was unnervingly immaculate, no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, just her still body and the heavy silence that hung over it like a shroud. It was as if the killer had taken great care to erase any traces of chaos. Standing at the threshold of the gruesome scene was her husband, Nathan Whitmore, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Nathan was a man known for his commanding presence as the CEO of Whitmore Industries, but in this moment, he seemed small and powerless. Behind him stood Andrew Winslow, his charismatic business partner and friend, and Monica Winslow, Andrew's poised yet piercingly observant wife. The trio stared in stunned disbelief, their polished facades crumbling under the weight of what lay before them. Further back, hovering near the grand staircase, was Angela Barnett, the Whitmore family's housekeeper. Her usually composed demeanor was replaced with visible panic, her eyes darted between the lifeless body of Melanie and the faces of those around her, as though searching for an explanation, or perhaps a way to disappear. The call to the police had been frantic, filled with stammered words and choked sobs. By the time the first responders arrived, the atmosphere inside the mansion was suffocating. The once pristine home, a symbol of wealth and refinement, now felt like a tomb. Detectives combed through the scene with meticulous precision. Their questions pierced the silence, directed at everyone present. Where had they been? What had they heard? What had they seen? Nathan's response was mechanical, his voice monotone as he recounted being in his study until he heard Angela's scream. Andrew claimed he was upstairs in the guest room, reading emails. Monica said she had been in the garden. Angela, visibly shaken, admitted she had been cleaning the upper floor until she came downstairs to find Melanie lying in a pool of blood. Yet, something about their stories felt off. The detectives exchanged subtle glances, noting the gaps and inconsistencies. The absence of forced entry suggested that Melanie had known her killer. The precision of the wounds hinted at a deliberate, premeditated act. And the silence, that suffocating silence, left one haunting question lingering in the air: who among them had carried out this unthinkable act? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its light only seemed to deepen the shadows inside the Whitmore mansion. Outside, the press began to gather, drawn by whispers of scandal and intrigue surrounding the family. Inside, the clock ticked on, but the answers remained elusive. Melanie Whitmore was dead, and someone in that house knew why. The Whitmore mansion, a symbol of opulence and power, reflected the lives of its occupants, polished, pristine, and hiding secrets beneath its gleaming surface. Each inhabitant, and those within their closest circle, carried a distinct aura of success and sophistication, but their curated facades concealed far more complex realities. Nathan Whitmore had built his empire from the ground up. Born into modest beginnings, he had clawed his way to the top, establishing Whitmore Industries, a global conglomerate that dominated in real estate, technology, and investment. He was a man revered for his sharp intellect and unyielding determination, often described as charming yet intimidating. In the boardroom, his words could sway markets. At home, he was the epitome of composure. But beneath his polished exterior lay a man haunted by the relentless pursuit of perfection. The cracks in his carefully maintained life began to show as his marriage to Melanie became more of a business arrangement than a partnership, a truth he had refused to confront, until now. Melanie Whitmore was a star in her own right. A celebrated art dealer, she had made her name by curating some of the most sought-after collections in the contemporary art world. Her gallery, established in 2008, was a haven for rising talents, and her presence at high-profile events was a mark of distinction. Known for her elegance and discerning eye, Melanie had an innate ability to captivate a room. Yet, the pressures of maintaining her image, combined with the emptiness of a loveless marriage, left her feeling isolated. To the outside world, she was a paragon of success. In private, she yearned for something real, a spark, a connection. That yearning led her to a dangerous liaison, one that would unravel everything she had built. At the center of that entanglement was Andrew Winslow, Nathan's longtime business partner and confidant. Andrew was everything Nathan was not: effortlessly charming, adventurous, and disarmingly approachable. With his sharp wit and magnetic presence, he was a natural-born negotiator, a man who thrived on risk. As co-founder of several successful ventures alongside Nathan, Andrew was a respected figure in the business world. But behind the charm was a man driven by desire and indulgence. His attraction to Melanie, born from casual flirtation, quickly evolved into an affair that blurred the lines between passion and recklessness. His actions were a ticking time bomb, one that he seemed unwilling, or unable, to defuse. Monica Winslow, Andrew's wife, was no less formidable. A woman of sharp intellect and undeniable poise, she exuded a quiet authority that demanded attention. Monica was well connected in the social elite, often acting as the glue that held her husband's chaotic energy in check. She had built her own reputation as a philanthropist and a shrewd networker. But Monica was also deeply perceptive, her intuition honed by years of navigating high-stakes environments. She had long sensed something amiss between Andrew and Melanie, though she had yet to act on her suspicions. Beneath her calm exterior was a storm of resentment and fear, emotions that would soon come to a head. Then there was Angela Barnett, the Whitmore family's housekeeper. Angela had worked for the Whitmores for nearly a decade, her presence so constant that she often blended into the background. Quiet and unassuming, she was trusted to maintain the mansion's pristine order. Yet, Angela's proximity to the family gave her access to their most private moments, a vantage point from which she observed the fractures and tensions they tried so hard to conceal. What no one knew, or suspected, was the depth of Angela's own secrets. Behind her subdued demeanor lay ambitions and resentments she kept tightly locked away. These 5 lives intersected in ways that were both intricate and volatile. Nathan's unrelenting drive for perfection, Melanie's search for connection, Andrew's thirst for adventure, Monica's determination to maintain control, and Angela's hidden motives all collided under one roof. Their intertwined fates would create a chain of events so explosive that it would shatter their carefully constructed worlds. As the investigation into Melanie's death unfolded, the detectives would come to see each of them not just as potential witnesses, but as suspects with motives rooted in jealousy, betrayal, and ambition. The pristine Whitmore mansion, once a symbol of triumph, had become a crucible of secrets, with each resident holding a piece of the puzzle that could reveal the truth, or bury it forever. The story of the Whitmores and Winslows was not one of simple friendship but of a web woven with shared ambitions, intertwined desires, and buried secrets. Their relationship, forged in the gilded halls of high society, began as a partnership of convenience but gradually transformed into something far more dangerous. Nathan Whitmore and Andrew Winslow first met during an elite business summit in Manhattan, drawn together by mutual respect for each other's entrepreneurial acumen. Their wives, Melanie and Monica, were introduced during a lavish charity gala not long after, where the two couples found themselves naturally aligning. The Winslows' vibrant charisma complemented the Whitmores' stoic sophistication, and together, they became a social powerhouse in the upper echelons of society. Invitations to exclusive events, private yacht trips, and weekends at luxurious retreats became common. What had begun as mutual admiration quickly deepened into friendship. However, beneath the polished veneer of camaraderie, cracks began to form. Melanie, whose marriage to Nathan had grown increasingly cold, found herself drawn to Andrew's unrestrained charm. At first, their connection was harmless, a shared laugh over a joke at a party, a stolen moment of conversation during an evening when their spouses were distracted. But those fleeting exchanges grew into something more. Melanie, who had long felt like a trophy in Nathan's meticulously curated life, discovered in Andrew an escape from the suffocating expectations of her marriage. For Andrew, Melanie represented a break from the predictability of his life with Monica. Where Monica was composed and calculating, Melanie was spontaneous and vulnerable. Andrew's initial flirtations were driven by curiosity, but they soon spiraled into a full-blown affair. The secrecy only heightened the thrill, as they found excuses to meet under the guise of business or social obligations. Their shared moments became a dangerous game of stolen glances and whispered promises, all while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Monica, ever the astute observer, began to sense the growing closeness between her husband and Melanie. Though she said nothing at first, her suspicions took root. She began to watch them closely, noting the subtle changes in Andrew's demeanor and Melanie's uncharacteristic excitement during their gatherings. Monica's fears were not unfounded. She had always known Andrew's propensity for risk-taking, and now, it seemed, those risks extended to matters of the heart. Meanwhile, Nathan remained oblivious to the unfolding drama, consumed by his relentless drive to expand Whitmore Industries. To him, Andrew was a trusted confidant, someone who shared his vision for success. Nathan's emotional distance from Melanie, which had once been a mere annoyance to her, now seemed insurmountable. He had always viewed their marriage as a partnership rooted in mutual benefit rather than passion, failing to see how deeply Melanie yearned for more. Adding to the complexity was Angela Barnett, the ever-present housekeeper who had witnessed more than anyone realized. Angela's quiet demeanor masked her sharp observations. She noticed the way Melanie's laughter lingered when Andrew was around, the way Monica's eyes narrowed during these interactions, and the way Nathan's absence left a void in his wife's life. Angela kept these observations to herself, but deep down, she understood that the harmony within the Whitmore mansion was a fragile facade. In 2019, the situation took a darker turn. Melanie discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that shook her to the core. Though she suspected Andrew was the father, she kept this secret, fearing the destruction it could cause. The pregnancy only deepened her internal conflict. She began to withdraw from Andrew, recognizing that their relationship was built on instability. But her attempts to distance herself only fueled Andrew's determination to keep her close. The growing tension was palpable during gatherings between the Whitmores and Winslows. Monica's veiled barbs toward Melanie became sharper, while Andrew grew bolder in his affections, sometimes risking exposure. Nathan, unaware of the undercurrents, remained focused on his work, blissfully ignorant of the storm brewing within his own home. By the time 2020 arrived, the relationships between the two couples were strained to the breaking point. Melanie, torn between her loyalty to Nathan and her feelings for Andrew, found herself trapped in a web of her own making. Andrew's obsession with her became suffocating, while Monica's quiet rage simmered just beneath the surface. Angela, too, began to feel the weight of the secret she carried, her role as an observer transforming into something far more dangerous. As the days ticked closer to June, the tension reached its peak. Melanie's pregnancy, still a secret to most, became the unspoken catalyst for the events that would soon unravel. The once glamorous bond between the Whitmores and Winslows had morphed into a volatile mix of desire, betrayal, and jealousy. It was no longer a question of if things would explode, but when. The tension that had simmered for months between the Whitmores and the Winslows finally reached a breaking point on the evening of June 15, 2020. The night air around the Whitmore mansion was thick, nearly suffocating, as the two couples gathered for what was intended to be a calm, private dinner. But beneath the forced smiles and polite exchanges lay a boiling pot of unspoken grievances and barely contained resentment. The stakes were higher than ever, and it was only a matter of time before someone broke the silence. The evening started as usual, polished and composed. Nathan poured drinks, engaging Andrew in talk of business expansions and potential investments while Monica and Melanie exchanged pleasantries in the sitting room. Yet, every exchange was laced with tension. Monica's gaze never left Melanie, scrutinizing every gesture, every subtle expression. Melanie, aware of Monica's scrutiny, felt her nerves fray as the night wore on, her hands trembling slightly as she held her wine glass. It was only a matter of time before the truths they had been avoiding came crashing down around them. As the night progressed, Melanie could feel her resolve slipping. She had been keeping a secret that gnawed at her constantly, a secret she could no longer ignore. She was pregnant, and though she hadn't dared confirm it with Andrew, she knew in her heart that the child was his. Torn between her role as Nathan's wife and her bond with Andrew, she was caught in an inescapable web of betrayal and guilt. The weight of her predicament bore down on her, making her feel trapped, cornered. It was this unbearable pressure that pushed her to speak, unable to keep the silence any longer. At the dinner table, she finally gathered the courage to speak, her voice barely above a whisper yet echoing like a cannon shot through the room. "I have something to tell you all," she began, her voice trembling but resolute. Andrew's face blanched as he realized what was coming, his expression slipping into one of barely restrained panic. Monica's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening into clarity, while Nathan's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm pregnant," Melanie said, the words heavy with implication. She couldn't bring herself to look at anyone but Andrew, and that one lingering glance told everyone at the table what they needed to know. Andrew was the father. The room fell silent, thick with shock and disbelief. Monica's face twisted into a mask of anger and betrayal, her eyes blazing with an intensity that seemed to cut right through Melanie. Nathan sat frozen, his face drained of color, his expression a mix of shock and pain as he absorbed the implications of his wife's admission. "You've been lying to me," Monica spat at Andrew, her voice sharp as broken glass. Her hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. "You've been lying to me this entire time." Her voice, usually controlled, cracked under the weight of her fury. Andrew, at a loss for words, reached for her, attempting to offer an explanation that even he knew would be futile. "Monica, it wasn't supposed to," he started, but she cut him off, standing abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "It wasn't supposed to what? Happen? Destroy our marriage?" Her voice was a mix of bitterness and venom, years of loyalty and restraint unraveling in an instant. She turned her gaze to Melanie, contempt etched into every line of her face. "And you? I trusted you." Nathan, who had been silent until now, finally found his voice, though it was low, nearly breaking. "How long, Melanie?" he asked, the hurt in his eyes clear. "How long have you been lying to me?" His words were filled with disbelief and a deep-seated pain that Melanie hadn't anticipated. I didn't mean for it to be this way," Melanie stammered, her voice breaking. "I was lost, Nathan. I needed something." She cast a desperate look toward Andrew, who could only meet her gaze with guilt and regret. The argument escalated, voices rising as the four of them tore into each other, each accusation stoking the fire. Angela, the housekeeper, could hear the shouting from down the hall, her presence unnoticed by the others. She lingered in the shadows, listening to the explosion of secrets and lies, her own pulse quickening as she realized the gravity of what was unfolding. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Melanie rose from the table, overcome by the weight of their scorn. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the cacophony of anger surrounding her. She backed away from the table, her hand over her mouth, and retreated up the staircase, disappearing into the dim light of the second floor. Her departure left a raw silence hanging in the room, each person left to confront the aftermath of her confession. Nathan and Monica, both seething with rage and betrayal, exchanged a tense, understanding look, their collective hurt forming a dark alliance. Andrew remained seated, his head in his hands, the gravity of his actions pressing down on him. Angela, still concealed in the shadows, continued to observe, the wheels in her mind turning as she grasped the significance of what had just occurred. The once comfortable bond between the Whitmores and Winslows had transformed into a minefield of secrets, jealousy, and betrayal. The final thread had snapped, and there would be no going back. The next morning, only one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The morning of June 16, 2020, saw a flurry of activity as the police swarmed the Whitmore mansion. News of Melanie Whitmore's tragic and suspicious death had already started circulating among the elite, and with it came a cascade of whispers and speculations. To the press gathered outside the gates, it was a story of scandal and betrayal in high society. To the detectives, it was a murder investigation shrouded in secrecy and layered with lies. Inside, the mansion's somber halls were thick with tension. Detectives combed the scene meticulously, gathering evidence and photographing every inch of the grand foyer where Melanie's lifeless body had been found. Her husband, Nathan, along with Andrew and Monica Winslow, and the family's housekeeper, Angela Barnett, were kept under close watch, their movements restricted and their statements taken separately. Every glance, every sigh, every subtle twitch was scrutinized by the detectives. Nathan sat alone in a dimly lit room, his face drawn and hollow. His initial shock had given way to a cold, calculated silence. When questioned, he recounted his movements from the previous night with a mechanical precision. He insisted he had been in his study most of the evening, claiming he hadn't even heard the confrontation between Melanie and the Winslows. But the detectives noted his detachment, the stiffness in his responses. Was it the shock of his wife's death, or was he hiding something deeper? In another room, Andrew Winslow struggled to maintain his composure, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. He confirmed that he had indeed been part of a heated argument with Melanie the night before, admitting they had exchanged words that would be inappropriate in any civilized company. "She told us she was pregnant," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. She said I was the father." His words hung heavy in the air, the revelation casting a new light on the tangled relationships between the four of them. Andrew claimed he had retreated to a guest room after the argument, trying to process the bombshell Melanie had dropped, though his alibi seemed tenuous at best. Meanwhile, Monica sat with a steady glare, her eyes hardened and unreadable. She did not mince words as she recounted the betrayal she felt upon hearing Melanie's confession. Monica admitted to feeling hurt and angered but insisted she had no desire to harm Melanie. "I went to bed," she stated simply, her words clipped, betraying no emotion. "I wanted nothing more to do with any of them." Her alibi, though clear, lacked the detail and sincerity the detectives sought, leaving them skeptical of her story. And then there was Angela Barnett, the housekeeper who had worked for the Whitmores for years. Angela's demeanor was nervous, her eyes darting around the room as she gave her statement. She admitted to hearing the argument from down the hall and admitted that she had seen Melanie retreat to her room afterward. But her account was fragmented, her voice wavering as she recalled the events. I found her this morning," Angela said, swallowing hard. "I came downstairs to start cleaning, and there she was. I screamed, I didn't know what else to do." Yet, as the detectives questioned Angela further, they began to notice inconsistencies in her story. She hesitated under questioning, her gaze shifting away each time they pressed her for details about her whereabouts during the night. A keen-eyed detective noted a small cut on Angela's hand, almost imperceptible, yet suspiciously fresh. When asked about it, Angela stammered, saying she had accidentally cut herself on a broken glass the previous day. But the explanation felt rehearsed, too neat and convenient, and the detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to Angela's role in the events of that night than she was letting on. As the initial round of questioning concluded, the detectives regrouped to piece together the conflicting accounts. Nathan's aloofness, Andrew's guilt-ridden panic, Monica's simmering resentment, and Angela's apparent nervousness, all pointed to potential motives and hidden truths. But without concrete evidence, their suspicions remained just that, suspicions. Determined to dig deeper, the detectives ordered a forensic sweep of the entire mansion, paying particular attention to the guest rooms, study, and foyer. In the incinerator in the basement, they made a chilling discovery: the remnants of a kitchen knife, partially burned but still recognizable. The sight of the charred blade sent a wave of unease through the team. The knife was bagged and sent to the lab for analysis, a potential murder weapon now added to their list of evidence. Later that day, they returned to question the suspects once more, focusing particularly on Angela. Her earlier account had left too many gaps, and the cut on her hand remained suspicious. They pressed her, demanding a clearer timeline of her activities the previous night, but her responses were evasive, her words stumbling as though she was trying to keep up with her own lies. As night fell over the Whitmore mansion, the investigation was far from over. The detectives left the house with a sense that they were only beginning to unravel a dark and twisted truth. Each suspect held a piece of the puzzle, yet none of their stories aligned. In the days that would follow, as forensic results returned and new evidence emerged, the walls of deception they had each built around themselves would begin to crumble, revealing the ugly secrets that had led to Melanie Whitmore's untimely demise. The stage was set, and the search for the truth had only just begun. With the investigation grinding forward, tensions inside the Whitmore mansion grew tighter each passing day. Detectives scrutinized every word, every movement of those involved, piecing together the fragments of lies and secrets that had been uncovered. The breakthrough they needed, however, came from the forensic analysis of the kitchen knife discovered in the mansion's incinerator. The blade had been charred, yet it bore traces of a single, distinct fingerprint, one that matched Angela Barnett, the Whitmore family's longtime housekeeper. Confronted with this damning evidence, Angela was brought in for a final, intense round of questioning. The cool detachment she had tried to maintain throughout the investigation had faded, replaced by an unmistakable sense of dread. She avoided eye contact with the detectives, her hands trembling visibly. As they laid the evidence before her, the knife, the blood-stained dress she had worn that night, and, most hauntingly, the fresh cut on her own hand, Angela's composure crumbled. "What happened, Angela?" one of the detectives asked, his voice measured yet firm. "We have your fingerprints on the weapon. The time has come to tell the truth." Angela's lips quivered as she struggled to find the words. For a moment, it seemed as though she might try to deny it, to fabricate one last story to escape their scrutiny. But under the intense gaze of the investigators, something in her finally broke. She let out a shuddering breath, her eyes welling with tears, and began to speak. It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for her to die. I swear. I didn't mean it." The detectives leaned in, their pens poised over their notepads, as Angela, still shaken, continued her confession. "Melanie was in the living room that night," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "I was cleaning upstairs when I heard voices, angry voices. I couldn't hear everything, but I knew something was wrong. So, I went downstairs. I thought I could help, somehow. But when I got there, Melanie was alone, pacing back and forth, muttering to herself." Angela paused, a haunted look passing over her face as she recalled that night. She looked furious. Like I'd never seen her before. "I tried to leave, but she saw me. She called me over, told me she knew I'd been sneaking around, snooping in on things I had no business knowing." Angela swallowed, the bitterness of the memory etched in her expression. "She threatened to report me to Nathan, to fire me, even to have me arrested." One of the detectives interrupted, his tone probing. "Arrested for what, Angela?" Her face twisted with shame as she admitted, I'd been stealing. Little things, here and there. They wouldn't notice, small pieces of jewelry, cash from wallets. Just enough to get by. But Melanie found out. She'd caught me once before, and she gave me a warning. I thought she'd forgotten. But she hadn't. That night, she told me she was going to ruin me. The room fell silent as Angela's confession sank in. Melanie's knowledge of Angela's thefts had put her life on the line that night, a decision that would ultimately prove fatal. I begged her, Angela continued, her voice cracking. I told her I'd do anything, that I'd give it all back. But she wouldn't listen. She said she'd had enough of everyone taking advantage of her, of everyone lying to her. She was so angry. I could see it in her eyes. Angela's hands twisted together as she recounted the next moments, her voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't know what else to do. I saw the knife on the coffee table. I picked it up, thinking maybe I could just scare her, make her see how desperate I was. But when she reached for her phone, something snapped. I panicked. I couldn't let her make that call. I didn't mean to, but Her voice trailed off, the words sticking in her throat. Tears streamed down her face as she finally admitted, I stabbed her. Again and again. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When it was over, I was covered in blood, and she was lying there, so still. I knew I'd killed her. The detectives exchanged glances, the grim satisfaction of a case closed mixed with the horror of the truth they had uncovered. But Angela wasn't finished. I thought about running, about leaving and never coming back, she continued, her tone hollow. But I knew they'd find me. So, I tried to hide what I'd done. I burned the knife, changed my clothes, and went back to my room, pretending I hadn't seen anything. I thought maybe I could fool everyone, make them think it was someone else, but I was wrong. With her confession complete, Angela slumped in her chair, defeated. The detectives took down her statement, each word solidifying the case against her. Angela Barnett, the quiet, unassuming housekeeper, had murdered Melanie Whitmore in a fit of desperation and panic. Her actions had been brutal, the result of years of pent-up resentment and fear coming to a violent head. As the detectives led Angela away in handcuffs, a chilling silence settled over the Whitmore mansion. The truth was out, but the damage done could never be repaired. Melanie was gone, her life ended in a brutal, senseless act, and those left behind were left to pick up the pieces of a world shattered by lies, betrayal, and greed. The mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, now stood as a monument to the tragic consequences of deceit, its walls forever scarred by the events of that fateful night. Angela Barnett's confession should have brought a finality to the harrowing events surrounding Melanie Whitmore's death. And yet, as the dust settled, those left behind in the wake of her crime found themselves facing the debris of shattered lives and unanswered questions. The Whitmore mansion, once a symbol of strength and prosperity, had become a dark place steeped in scandal and death, a haunting reminder of the brutal truths hidden within its walls. The trial proceeded quickly, given Angela's full confession and the physical evidence that placed her at the scene. Her lawyer attempted a plea for leniency, arguing that her crime had been an act of desperation, born from fear and a long-standing sense of powerlessness within the Whitmore household. Yet, the prosecution painted a far grimmer picture, characterizing Angela as a calculating murderer who had taken advantage of her position in the family's home to exact a deadly vengeance. The courtroom was packed during the sentencing, with journalists, onlookers, and members of high society all riveted by the dramatic fall of the Whitmore family's quiet housekeeper. Angela sat quietly, her face devoid of expression, as the judge pronounced her sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict resonated through the room, eliciting a collective gasp. Angela's confession had sealed her fate, yet her silence in court remained unnerving. She didn't beg for mercy, didn't offer apologies, she simply accepted her fate, as though her punishment was simply another chapter in a life marred by neglect and servitude. With Angela's sentencing, it seemed that justice had been served. However, for Nathan Whitmore and the Winslows, the repercussions of that fateful night continued to unfold, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. Nathan Whitmore was left to wrestle with the cruel realities exposed by his wife's death. The affair between Melanie and Andrew Winslow had left a scar on his soul, a betrayal so deep that it changed the way he viewed his own life and achievements. Though Nathan had always presented a composed and powerful front, his wife's death left him hollow, struggling with the reality that he had been blind to her unhappiness. Now, with her gone, he was left questioning every decision he had made, every moment of neglect that had driven her into the arms of another man. Andrew Winslow, too, was haunted by guilt and regret. He had always thrived on risk, both in business and in his personal life, but the consequences of his affair with Melanie weighed on him heavily. In his mind, the affair had been a mutual escape, a thrill that he had naively assumed could remain hidden. Now, Melanie's death was a constant reminder of the pain his actions had caused, not just to himself, but to his wife Monica, who had been forced to bear the public humiliation of his betrayal. Andrew withdrew from his social circles, finding solace only in isolation, and slowly began to dismantle the life he had built alongside Nathan, unable to bear the remnants of his past. Monica Winslow, however, was a different story. For years, she had played the role of the dutiful wife, supportive and loyal, only to have her trust shattered in a single night. Betrayed by both her husband and her closest friend, Monica's sorrow turned to resentment. The veneer of control she had so carefully maintained began to crack, and whispers circulated among their social circle about her increasingly reclusive and erratic behavior. The betrayal had wounded her deeply, but it had also unleashed a darker part of her nature. Some said that her silence was merely the calm before a storm, that she harbored plans for retribution that would one day see her take back what she felt was rightfully hers. And then there were the final, lingering questions that haunted everyone involved, questions that Angela's confession had left unanswered. During the investigation, detectives had discovered a small, sealed letter tucked away in Melanie's room. It was addressed to Nathan but had been written in haste, the ink smeared in places as though Melanie had been interrupted while writing it. The letter spoke vaguely of threats and of feeling trapped, her words hinting at a deeper fear that went beyond Angela's accusations. This letter cast a chilling shadow over the entire case. Had there been someone else involved in Melanie's death? Someone who had driven her to desperation, who might have manipulated Angela or planted the seeds of fear in her mind? Or had Melanie been planning to leave Nathan, only to find herself ensnared by a web of secrets she could not escape? The detectives revisited the evidence, but nothing concrete emerged to suggest another party had been directly involved. Still, the air of doubt hung heavy, raising the possibility that Angela might have been part of a larger, more sinister plan, one orchestrated by forces unseen. In the end, Angela alone bore the weight of Melanie's death, but those left behind could not shake the feeling that the story was far from over. Nathan Whitmore, haunted by the unanswered questions and the betrayal of his wife, withdrew into his empire, his demeanor colder and more calculated than ever. The Winslows moved away, their marriage hanging by a thread as Monica's anger festered, while Andrew carried his guilt like a shadow, eroding the life he had once cherished. And the Whitmore mansion, now empty, remained a monument to ambition and ruin, a place where dreams of power and love had decayed into lies and violence. The world moved on, but the ghosts of that night remained, embedded in every corner, every echoing hallway, waiting for their final story to be told. The truth about Melanie Whitmore's life, and death, remained veiled, a mystery that would haunt all who had crossed its path. And as the years passed, whispers of that night would linger in society's corners, a cautionary tale of betrayal, ambition, and the price paid when love and trust are sacrificed on the altar of power.